Hey there, Ninja. I'm Stephanie Stiavetti, and today we're going to talk about the history of Christmas cookies. Christmas cookies have a fascinating history. Like, nobody really thinks about it, really, unless you're a historian or you study religion and food. But Christmas cookies have been around for, well, probably as long as Christmas has, right? They came from originally becoming just like drops of like grain flour mixed with water and something sweet and dropped on rocks by the fire. I'm sure they weren't super tasty at that point. But they evolved into what they are today. And here's some really interesting kinds of Christmas cookies that you're going to learn about in this post. So Christmas cookies have roughly been around and defined as Christmas cookies in modern times since about the 1500s. And a lot of that began with gingerbread. But the thing is, in Europe, gingerbread was limited to guild bakers, meaning that the only people in a town that could bake gingerbread were people that were licensed by the government. But during the holidays, those regulations were loosened a little bit so people at home could make their own gingerbread without making the law, which made gingerbread really, really special. Now, gingerbread originated somewhere around the Crusades, and it actually was kind of interesting. It was just like breadcrumbs and honey and some spices pressed into like these little cookie boards, right? They were like boards with a hole cut out of them, and then the hole was decorated with like some sort of like, religious image. And then people pushed the gingerbread dough into those cookies and then popped them out and ate them. These eventually became known as Speculoos, which I'm sure you've heard, or Speculoos, and people started shaping them into animals and all sorts of other shapes, and that's when they really became associated with Christmas. Now, the history of Christmas tree-shaped cookies is really interesting because that began with people in the Alsace region of Germany, which is now France, were hanging decorated communion wafers on their Christmas trees. And I think as everybody knows from the song, like the German word for Christmas tree is Tannenbaum. So they were hanging these really interesting little decorated wafers, that you have when you're first communion if you're Catholic, hanging those on their Christmas tree, and those became Christmas cookies for them. And then, of course, in the United States, back in the 1800s, you remember those little Barnum cookies, Christmas, or the animal cracker cookies that came in the little box? Like, they make them in modern times. They still have the little handle on them. Those were actually specifically designed so that you could hang them on a Christmas tree around Christmas time. Now, back in the 1800s here in the United States, the Pennsylvania Dutch, children used to cut out these really big cookies and hang them in the window. And those eventually evolved into like people-shaped cookies. And here's what's really interesting is back in the day, like they were decorated pretty heavily, like they were very decorative. This was like a big holiday festive occasion, but they used to cut out magazine cutouts and use those as the face. That was the tradition. And of course the magazine paper face had to be like popped off before you could eat the cookie. But like I always thought that was a really cool fact. Taking cookies and decorating them with scraps and making them look more human like actual people. And actually there was a lot of controversy about this. Apparently some forms of Christian sects were not happy with the idea of using, cut out magazine faces on these Christmas cookies because they weren't religious enough. These faces did not depict Jesus. They were just everyday people. And then somewhere around the 1840s, Santa became associated with Christmas. And then, of course, a lot of the cookies started taking on Santa shapes and Santa faces. And that continued to sort of incense the factions that were really upset about the fact that these cookies did not look like Jesus, which for them was the core reason for the holiday. And then there's the tradition of leaving cookies out for Santa. Now, the jury's still out on what actually started this, but one of the theories that historians have come up with is that this began as a tradition in the Great Depression era where people were encouraging their children to be more generous by leaving cookies out for Santa because people didn't have a lot of food, they didn't have a lot of money, so leaving cookies out for Santa Claus was a severe act of generosity because they didn't have that much to begin with, and it was all in a lesson to teach their children generosity. So be sure to check out the post. It's either on this page or you'll find a link to it on this page. And as always, be sure to visit Fearless Fresh if you want to become a faster, more creative, more efficient home cook. Have a good one.